Today we have some more actual history about the western frontier of Texas during the 1860s. This episode concerns the attack on Miss Ann Whitney while she was teaching at a small schoolhouse in Hamilton, Texas, back in 1867. We will be reading from this book, 70 Years in Texas by J.M. Franks. This book was published all the way back in 1924. We actually released an episode about 2 years ago on this channel about the attack on Miss Ann Whitney's schoolhouse. In that episode, we read the account given in J.W. Wilbarger's 1889 book, Indian Depredations in Texas. In this account by J.M. Franks, that we will read from today, he tells of reports that it was not Comanches who attacked Miss Whitney, but white men dressed as Indians. After reading the story of Miss Ann Whitney, we will also read about the attack on the son of Jim Boyd. Mr. Boyd believed that it was white men dressed as Indians who killed his son. Miss Whitney was killed, I believe, in the summer of 1867. She was teaching school near the Leon River in Hamilton County. I will try to give the story just as it was told to me, and as I remember it, but I may not get it just right. There was a valley or clearing between the schoolhouse and the bottom, and it seemed that one of the children looked out and saw the Indians coming towards the house, and told the teacher there were Indians coming. But the teacher thought that they were cow hunters, and told the child to get to her lesson, that they were just cowboys. She never went to the door to look, as she was so sure they were cowboys, but the little girl kept watching them, and at last she jumped up and said, "It is Indians, for I saw their bows, and they have them in their hands." At this the teacher stepped to the door, and saw the Indians almost within 100 yards of the house. She was satisfied from their actions that the Indians meant to kill them, and she got some of the children out of the house, and told them to get into the bottom. The rest were little fellows, and she put them under the house and told them not to make any noise. By this time the Indians were shooting arrows through the cracks of the house at Miss Whitney, while others were at work bursting the door down. Soon they were in the house, sticking spears and arrows in the body of that noble young woman, who, with blood streaming down her body, begged the Indians to kill her but not hurt the children. Thus the noble girl sank down in death. The little son of Manning was recaptured by the white men and brought home. I do not know anything about Miss Whitney's relatives. I think she had a brother, Ed Whitney, who died in Comanche County several years ago. Now the reader will pardon me, I think, for as I have said, I was not going to say anything about the old vigilant committees. But in order to show that all the crimes that were committed and credited to the Indians were not always Indians, I will have to speak of one circumstance in regard to this killing of Miss Whitney, but will call no names, as a great many people believe that the men who killed Miss Whitney were not Indians, but white men disguised as Indians. The reader will remember that Miss Whitney begged these men to kill her and spare the children. I do not know how they found that out unless the children under the floor heard her talking to the men, for she was killed outright. I have never heard any comments on this, and I have read several accounts of this murder. It seems to me very plain that she knew that they were not all Indians, or she would not have talked to them as she did. But I will speak of one thing that occurred, and the reader can draw his own conclusions. As I have said previously, I will call no names. In the spring of 1868, there was a man arrested in Gatesville for something, I never knew what he was charged with, and put in a little old log jail. This was the first jailhouse that was built in the county. There was a man that was a natural detective who got to talking to this fellow in jail. I never knew how he worked in with him, but anyway, I have heard that he told all about the killing of Miss Whitney, and said he was one of the men in that bunch. I do not know how many were in the bunch that killed Miss Whitney, probably 7 or 8. Now, reader, I do not vouch for this man's statement. It might have been a lie he told, but why he told it I never knew. But I am sure he told it, yet I did not hear it. Well, anyway, one night he was taken out and hung to a post oak tree. If this man told the truth, he got what was coming to him, but if he was not telling the truth, he should not have told it. So now you can think whatever you please about the matter. I think this post oak tree is still standing, or was a few years ago a little east in the backyard of Edgar Franks's home in Gatesville, but it is quite dumb and silent on the matter. Earlier in this story, I have told of the killing of the Boyd boy during the Civil War, and what Uncle Jim Boyd told me in regard to it, and I am bound to believe that these two killings were done by white men acting as Indians. There may have been some Indians in the bunch, but not all. So that's it for this account of the killing of Miss Ann Whitney from J.M. Frank's book, 70 Years in Texas. In J.W. Wilbarger's version of the story, he mentions that there was at least one Indian who could speak English. However, this group of Indians also kidnapped a boy by the name of Kuykendall, and they also severely wounded one of the girls in the schoolhouse who survived. They also tried to kill many other settlers who were out nearby that day. So to me it seems unlikely that this group would be composed of all white men, although perhaps there were some riding with the Comanches, and it's also possible that some of the white men with Comanches had been kidnapped many years ago, and had grown up with the tribe to become warriors. We are now going to read about the killing of the Boyd boy, which J.M. Franks alluded to in his story about Miss Whitney. This story seems to provide even stronger evidence that there were at least some whites who would commit depredations while disguised as Indians. In the summer of 1863 or 1864, during the Civil War, Jim Boyd, probably a nephew of Reverend Jim Boyd, whom I have spoken of in another chapter of this book, lived up not far from Old Jones Mill, where Jonesboro now stands on the Leon River. One morning his son, who was about 16 or 17 years old, and John Sellers, another boy of about the same age, rode out not far from the Round Mountain, or Potato Hill, about 3 miles south of Jones Mill. I don't remember just how they happened to discover the Indians, but there were 6 or 8 Indians after the boys. It seems that the Boyd boy and the other boy got separated, but at any rate the Boyd boy was killed and the other boy escaped. The Boyd boy was killed and scalped. I remember the time very well, for I saw these same men, I am sure, that very morning. I was out ox hunting and had stopped on top of the hill, right where the state training school buildings are now. I was looking north, and on top of the hill west of the 4-mile branch, or spring, I saw 6 or 8 men riding in what we called Indian file, one right behind the other. They were at least a mile from me. Don't know that they saw me at all, but knowing that men were so few in that country, I thought they might be Indians, so I did not care to go any further and turned back. The next day we heard that the Boyd boy had been killed, and another boy pursued by the Indians. Several years after the Civil War, I was talking to Old Man Boyd in regard to the killing of his son by the Indians, and he told me that he did not think that the men were Indians, but believed that they were white men acting like Indians. There were some men living up on the head of B House named Fulgums. These men were thought to be playing Indian, and I am not sure how it happened that they were arrested, but when they were, the men making the arrest found Indian masks and bows and arrows, and long black hair. I believe there was a cave or some such place near the house, where they had all their things hidden. The Fulgums included an old man and 2 or 3 sons, and probably some others. After these men were arrested, Boyd and the boy who was with his son when he was killed were sent to see if they could identify any of the men, but could not do so, for they looked like Indians. But when taken out to the corral to see the horses, the boy pointed out a cream-colored horse which he said was the horse that ran so close to him, said he knew he was not mistaken. I never knew what they did with this bunch of men. They were taken to San Antonio, and they might have looked down the rope so far as I know. I will say right here, the Indians did not give us as much trouble during the Civil War as the mean white men did. There were soldiers or rangers at the frontier posts. Colonel Jim Norris had a regiment at Camp Colorado during the war, and there were others at different posts. I don't know of any of the Norris men now living, but believe J.H. Chrisman, T.B. Sanders Sr., Bill Williamson, and R.L. Hampton were some of them. So that's it for this episode. This was a different look at the killing of Miss Ann Whitney in 1867 in Hamilton, Texas. The author of this book, J.M. Franks, apparently believed that these Fulgums, who were thought to have killed the Boyd boy during the Civil War, also killed Miss Ann Whitney in 1867. You can believe whatever you want, but my view is that these Fulgums may have been responsible for killing the Boyd boy, but that it was probably a group of Comanches with some white men riding with them who attacked the town of Hamilton that day in 1867. These white men may have been warriors who were kidnapped as children and grew up in a Comanche tribe. For example, we know that it was a red-headed white Indian who outraged and killed Mrs. Martha Sherman a few years before this, and there were many other reports of white men dressed like Indians during attacks on the West Texas frontier. It's also possible that some of these white men were outlaws who had allied with the Comanches during the turbulent times following the Civil War. I have been unable to find any information outside of this story on the Fulgums, or about the man who was hanged by a vigilance committee in Gatesville after saying that he was one of the white men in the group who attacked Miss Whitney. If you have any thoughts or additional information about these events, then feel free to comment below. This channel is called Unworthy History because we cover actual history that is now deemed unworthy to show on history channels on TV. Those history channels view actual history as unworthy of airtime on their channel, but we keep actual history alive on this channel by reading directly from old books. If you'd like to support the mission of Unworthy History, then consider joining our Patreon page or becoming a YouTube channel member. Your donation towards keeping actual history alive will be recognized at the end of each episode, and you will also have access to members-only videos that we occasionally release. So if you want to see more episodes like this, then be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on Unworthy History.